Well, I have had the chance to visit some pretty amazing places when it comes to World War II. We've been to Utah Beach and Omaha Beach and Sword Gold and Juneau. Had a chance to go up and see where the Americans fought at the Battle of the Bulge. And one place that I've always wanted to visit that I hadn't made it to yet until today is this place right here. This is Pearl Harbor. Well, this is one of those places that even whenever you're here, you can't hardly believe that you're here. I want to manage some expectations right from the get-go. There is a lot to see here. There are tons of different stories. So just understand that this isn't designed to be like a full-on documentary. There are going to be things that I leave out. We'll get to the end of this video and you'll be like, why didn't he talk about that? And I'll probably say the same thing. Anyway, we're going to show a few things around here at Pearl Harbor, maybe some things that are familiar to you, and maybe a few that you don't really get to see on YouTube or anything else that much. But all right, we're going to go ahead and dive in. Now here at Pearl Harbor, they have this museum and visitor center that kind of gives you some context as to what was going on in the years and months leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. And here we have a wall of faces, and it says, if you had been on Oahu, these faces may have been familiar. So you might have seen guys like Don Stratton from the USS Arizona, walking around. Or maybe Jim Daniels from the USS Enterprise, or Doris Miller, who is pretty well known for his role here at Pearl Harbor. We'll be talking more about him at another time. Okay, you also would have had civilians like Harry Pang on the Honolulu Fire Department. This map is showing a little bit of the geopolitical situation in 1941, and showing the area that was occupied by the Japanese by 1933. So that would have included like the Mariana Islands minus Guam. Okay, that was a U.S. territory. And some people will ask the question, why was there an attack on Pearl Harbor? Well, in short, the U.S. had placed an oil embargo on Japan. So for them to continue their expansion, well, they needed to get access to the oil supply in the Dutch East Indies, but in the way was the Philippines, which also was a U.S. territory at the time. So the idea was to take out the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Hawaii, also take out Wake Island, Guam, and the Philippines, and that would give the Japanese an open hand to expand outwards and get their oil supply. Right here they're talking about the U.S. moving the Pacific Fleet from the west coast to Pearl Harbor in the spring of 1940 in order to try and deter Japanese aggression. And then in command of the Army's Hawaiian Department was going to be this guy, Lieutenant General Short. And in command of the U.S. Pacific Fleet was Admiral Husband Kimmel. And they have an interesting quote here from Kimmel, and he says, I can say only this, that it shall be my personal motto or guiding principle to maintain the fleet at the highest level of efficiency and preparedness. And Husband Kimmel is going to receive a lot of criticism after the attack on Pearl Harbor. In here they also have a model of a Japanese aircraft carrier. This one in particular is the Akagi. It was one of the largest in the Japanese fleet and was kind of the pride of the Japanese Navy. There were going to be 6 fleet carriers carrying about 350 planes to Pearl Harbor, and pilots had undergone about 10 months of training to prepare for the attack on December 7th. But yeah, this is the Akagi, and after Pearl Harbor, its days would be numbered because it was going to be sunk in the Battle of Midway. One issue that the Japanese had as they were preparing for the attack on Pearl Harbor is that Pearl Harbor is a little bit shallow. It's only about 40 foot, and their torpedoes were designed to run deep. So they trained their pilots to come in at 30 feet and deployed their torpedoes. And they also had a new design where they put wooden fins on the torpedoes, which would allow them to run at a more shallow depth. Here they have a map showing the route of the Japanese carrier striking force as they made their way through the Pacific on their way to Hawaii, and of course also, you know, at the same time they're attacking Midway and Wake and Guam and the Philippines, as I mentioned. And the guy who is the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor is this guy right here, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Now, he was personally opposed to a war with the United States, but if they were going to go to war, he wanted the Japanese to strike first and to strike hard. Okay, we've come back out here to the harbor, and back here behind me in the distance, this is where Battleship Row would have been. So all along the opposite side of the harbor here, if you would have been standing here in 1941, you could have looked out and you would have seen battleships like the Nevada and the Arizona, the West Virginia and the Oklahoma. Let's see what else was there. The Tennessee, the Maryland, and then further to the south, you would have had the California, and they all would have been lined up right there, and would have been prime targets for the Japanese whenever they started moving in from the north on the morning of December 7th. So at around 7:47 a.m. on Sunday, December 7th, you can imagine just standing here, and this place would have just erupted in chaos. They have a map here right at the water's edge that gives us a little bit of an idea of where all of the ships and service craft were at on the morning of December 7th. So we've already mentioned Battleship Row with the 7 battleships that were kind of lined up here along Ford Island in the middle. There was another battleship that was in dry dock, which is right here. That is the Pennsylvania. And whenever the Japanese launched their attack on Pearl Harbor, they came in, as I said, from the north, and they kind of split up and then were hitting from different directions. And there are tons of stories that I could tell. I'm only going to focus on a few. But if you look at how Pearl Harbor is laid out, you can see right here something called the Southeast Lock. Well, the Japanese torpedo bombers that were coming in first used this as kind of like for lack of a better term, almost like a bowling alley, because if they were to go over the fleet supply depot here, well, there's a little bit of turbulence. Well, if you look following along the southeast lock, that puts the Oklahoma and the West Virginia right in the path. Now, there were a few other torpedo bombers that broke off and hit the California and also the Nevada, but the Oklahoma and the West Virginia really got hammered hard from the get-go. All right, so we're looking at the harbor again. We're kind of facing south-ish. And again, if we look out over Battleship Row, we can imagine, you know, the Nevada being right there. And just to the south of it, the Arizona, and then the West Virginia. The Oklahoma would have been right there about where the USS Missouri is. And Lieutenant Fuchida would have led the first assault of the American fleet here. And they would have had about 183 aircraft. Now, their main targets on the first wave were the battleships and carriers. Fortunately, the carriers were out to sea. But anyway, they came in, they hit the southern end of Ford Island first. So way out there in the distance was where the first hits were. And then on the other side of Ford Island, they hit the Utah and the Raleigh. And then 24 torpedo bombers would have come in and started nailing Battleship Row. So if you would have been standing right here, well, you would have been witnessing from left to right these torpedo bombers coming in along that alley, along the southeast lock that I was just talking about, and just slamming torpedoes into these battleships. So on that first run, 21 torpedoes were launched. 5 out of 12 that were sent to the Oklahoma hit. It capsized within 15 minutes. The West Virginia was hit by 7, so it would have been right around there. But fortunately, counterflooding kept it from capsizing and ended up settling to the bottom. And then farther to the south, the California got hit by 2. And unfortunately, their hatches were open for inspection that morning, and ended up causing more damage than it may have caused otherwise. But anyway, yeah, they ended up having, the Japanese ended up having about a 48% hit rate on that first run with their torpedoes. Here's another information panel that they have here on the first wave attack at Pearl Harbor. So here you can see Battleship Row, and you can see the Nevada and the Arizona. I didn't mention there was a repair ship called the Vestal that was on the outside of the Arizona that kind of protected it from torpedo attack. And then here we have Ford Island. If you look here, you can see the route that the Japanese took to attack Pearl Harbor. Now, Pearl Harbor is not the only place they're attacking here. They were also attacking at Wheeler Field. They're also attacking at Hickam Field. And they had come in right here at the north part of the island. And there was a radar station there. And they had actually picked up, you know, this huge group of Japanese aircraft coming in. But unfortunately, it was mistaken to, they thought that it was maybe some B-17s that were coming in from the San Francisco area. Now, after the initial assault by the Japanese torpedo bombers on Battleship Row, Fuchida led an assault with some dive bombers that were going to hit the inboard battleships that were inaccessible to torpedoes. Okay, so again, you would have had already, you know, the Oklahoma and the West Virginia and the Nevada and California would have been hit, and then you have these dive bombers that start coming in to try and pick up what the torpedo bombers couldn't. And this is when the Arizona is going to get hit. So we're going to hop on a boat and head on out to the wreckage of the USS Arizona. All right, so we just got out here to the memorial, and what we're looking at are some of the visible parts of the Arizona. So this right here is the number 3 gun turret that we're looking at. They have a drawing here that shows what the Arizona would have looked like before the attack, and then what the remains of the ship look like today. So after the torpedo run that hit the West Virginia and the Oklahoma, a Japanese Kate would have come in and started attacking the ships that weren't accessible to torpedoes, and the Arizona was one of the victims of that. And there was a Japanese Kate bomber that dropped a bomb right there around the number 2 gun turret, and whenever it hit, it caused an explosion that lifted this whole thing out of the water and basically sent a fireball most of the way back, or at least part way back of the ship, and killed a lot of these sailors instantly. We're looking now more towards the forward area of the Arizona, and there in the distance you can see remnants of the number 2 gun turret. So that's right around where that Japanese bomb would have landed, and then that buoy out there marks the bow of the Arizona. And then of course next to the Arizona was the USS Vestal, which also took some hits. And then in the distance is the USS Missouri. We'll be visiting that later, but it currently sits approximately where the Oklahoma would have sat. And then right here, it may be a little bit hard to see right now, but right here in this spot is where you can see oil from the Arizona still seeping up to the surface. So I've moved back over to the other side of the ship, and here you can really see that oil a little bit more clear over here than what you could on the other side. Here in the back part of the memorial, they have the names of all of the men who were killed here on the USS Arizona. Here it says, "To the memory of the gallant men here entombed and their shipmates who gave their lives in action on December 7th, 1941 on the USS Arizona." All right, well, we just got back over here after our boat ride out to the Arizona, and I have to say, that was something else. I know that I didn't probably show near as much as what I would have liked to, but once I got over there, this is my first time being to Pearl Harbor, first time going over to the Arizona. I just wanted to kind of spend some time and kind of soak it in, but pretty amazing to be able to stand over that wreckage and kind of think about what happened here on December 7th. We have some other things that we're going to show here, some of which maybe hasn't been shown a whole lot. All right, we've moved out here to Ford Island by the USS Missouri, and you can see the Arizona Memorial there in the background, and then also they have markers showing where the Tennessee would have been, also the West Virginia. So the West Virginia, it got hit really hard, and then right here where the Missouri currently sits is where the Oklahoma would have stood. So you would have had those Japanese torpedo bombers coming in from right out of this direction that I'm pointing in right now, coming towards us, and just hammered these poor battleships. We've moved over to Ford Island, and this is the memorial for the battleship Oklahoma. And they've done something pretty symbolic and pretty powerful here. They have 429 marble standards here, each with a name that represents the life of a sailor or Marine who was killed on the Oklahoma on December 7th of 1941. You can see they're all standing side by side in formation to represent these servicemen who were standing by the rail of their ship. But yeah, really something to stand here and just read these names. We're here at a spot that very few people get access to because it's on an active military base. Now, on the morning of December 7th, one of the first ships to get hit was the USS Utah. And right up here is a memorial to the Utah as well as the remains of the ship. Right here is the memorial for the USS Utah. Now, like I said, because it's on an active military base, this is something that not many people get to see. So on the morning of December 7th, this was one of the first ships to get hit at Pearl Harbor. You would have had Japanese torpedo bombers coming in from this direction right here, and the Utah would have been hit with 3 torpedoes. Now, in December of 41, this was kind of an outdated ship and had been earmarked to be used for target practice or gunnery practice, but it still had a crew on it. A lot of the guys on the Utah were killed in the attack. As you can see, the Utah capsized, and many of the men in the Utah are still there today. So this is kind of a tomb of sorts here at Pearl Harbor, and it's a shame that more people don't know about what happened here at this spot. And you might be asking the question, why is it that the Japanese were targeting this outdated battleship? Well, it may have just been more that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you look out ahead of me here in these open waters, This is where the U.S. carriers were supposed to be. So that was a huge target for the Japanese. Well, whenever they got here to Pearl Harbor, those carriers were gone and were out to sea. But the Utah was here. Here's an information panel that they have on the second wave, which came in at 8:54 in the morning. Now, by this time, the Americans were on full alert and were kind of prepared for this next wave. There were some American aircraft that made it up into the sky and were able to fight back. Of course, there was anti-aircraft fire coming up from the ground. The big mistake that the Japanese made on that second run is they kept going after the battleships. So one in particular was the Nevada. So the Nevada had been hit right out there, and it started making its way for open water and was trying to get out of the harbor, and it really attracted a lot of the attention of the Japanese. So they started going after that. They really should have been going probably after the fuel storage tanks and some of these other ships, and especially the cruisers instead. But anyway, by the time it was all said and done, the Japanese had sunk or significantly damaged about 21 vessels and over 300 aircraft, and there were 3,500 people who were dead or wounded here. When it was all said and done, there were 2,341 servicemen who lost their life in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Over half of those killed were on the Arizona. As a matter of fact, on the Arizona, there were 38 sets of brothers who lost their life, tragically. So we have some other things that we're going to be showing here at Pearl Harbor, but thought it might be appropriate to end with one last memorial that they have here on the grounds.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost.